And we are going to start our Decision 2020 team coverage with Team 12's Graham Resnick, who is live inside the Colosseum with a look at what the president may be talking about tonight. Graham?
Yeah, this is President Trump's 10th rally in Arizona in the last 5 years. The Colosseum, Veterans Memorial Coliseum, holds about 14,000 people. It is slowly filling up. The president will have 3 missions tonight, and you can sum it all up in one word, and that word is winning. First, the reality TV president is counter-programming the Democratic presidential debate in Las Vegas. The Democratic candidates will be beating each other up. Meantime, the president will have an adoring audience of thousands. Number 2, his toughest challenge. The president has to help lift Republican Senator Martha McSally to victory in November. A new poll out today shows McSally trailing Democrat Mark Kelly by 7 points. One more sign that Arizona is turning purple. And number 3, President Trump has to help himself. Arizona is now a battleground state. Voters here could decide in November who wins the White House. President Trump won Arizona in 2016 by just 3.5 points. He faces a tough fight. A lot depends on who the Democratic nominee is. Republicans are mainly focused on getting more voters to the polls. This event helps to make that happen. People are wondering where Governor Doug Ducey is tonight. He will be meeting the president at Sky Harbor Airport about 6 p.m. and then taking the motorcade over here to the Colosseum. But we do not expect to see Governor Ducey on the stage behind me at any time during this evening. You will see many Arizona members of Congress and other speakers. Live at the Veterans Memorial Coliseum, Graham Resnick, 12 News.
Thank you for that preview, Brad.